everyone, welcome to this video. So in this video I'm going to show you how I am going to edit the images I've taken from the workshop. So I got the last baby, and I'm selected two images that I want to edit and show you how I pretty much edit my images. It's really simple, straightforward. I like to try and perfect everything during the session where I can. It just it saves me so much time later on in post, So like, whereas if you're thinking about like the drops, the creases in your drops, as in your background, also the wrap as well. So if you can try and correct it on the day, it just saves you so much time, as many of us know. So I've gone ahead and selected two images that I want to show you how to edit. So usually when I do edit, I open them in Adobe Bridge. I select the images I want, I pop them in a folder that I want to edit them, and then I use Photoshop. So I open them up in Photoshop and I edit them. So for the purpose of this editing video, I've selected both this image and one that I shot with the baby on the Flacati. So we're going to go ahead, right click and open them with Adobe Photoshop. Now, in regards to the way I edit, I do have bought actions, and I've also created my own actions as well. So, but let's just not jump to there at the moment. So with the once I open them in Photoshop, because I shoot RAW, they'll open up in Camera Raw, and here is where I can adjust obviously the temperature, the exposure, contrast, and things like that. So in Z's Studio, I did find my images to look a bit warm, and I like my images very bright, so the temperature is quite warm. So I'm just gonna lower it a bit, and it just makes it a little bit more white, so to the colder side, and I think that's fine. I would have fixed my flowers in the shoot a bit more. They look kind of a little bit messy, but they'll do for now. And this image pretty much doesn't, to me, look like it requires a lot. Now here's a cute blonde baby, so I'm just going to tone down the warmth just a little bit. So I like my contrast and everything in there, so I'm going to leave it. That's all it needed. The second image as well, I'm going to just tone it down a bit in to the colder side, so it's not too warm, and the brightness, exposure is quite good, so I'm not going to overexpose it. That's pretty good. And then what I want to do is I want to just select both of them, so I can open them in Photoshop. I'm going to hit Option, Open, and then they just open up in Photoshop for you. Okay, so I was saying actions. So I use, I've always used greater than Gatsby actions, and I've also created a workflow for me that I currently use, because with actions it just cuts so much of your editing time. I do now have a bigger team that works with me, so I have like an editor now that's been working with me for almost a year now remotely, so she edits my images now. But time to time, if I have a model session, I need something edited pretty quick, I still use this same workflow as well, and the same actions as well. So I have my own actions, and I also tend to use, depending on what I'm trying to achieve, I'll use greater than Gatsby. I really like them because of their nice, cute colored overlays, and they make the images look really nice and warm and cute, depending what you want to sort of achieve. So for the sake of this, I'm going to use a few of both. With these two images, they don't need much editing. So this is my kind of this is the way I shoot. I try and shoot straight out of camera, which means try and perfect the image in camera, and if you can learn to do that, your editing time is definitely going to be cut by half. So let's go ahead and edit this image. Now the first thing I like to look at is the the composition of the image. So baby's in center, all good, flowers are great. I don't need to move those around or edit anything. I think the only thing I would do here is obviously move around, sort of cover the backdrop there. Ooh. And so I want to So I want to cover the backdrop, so make it look like the baby's just on a flicati. Now, this is why another thing is you don't really need, if you know how to edit these, use these sort of editing tools, you don't really need to go buy huge flicatis or huge backdrops. As you guys probably know, I use a lot of Graceland design backdrops, and I like to order my neoprene half and half, and I cut them, and I find that when I do use them, you know, I don't need, you know, I know how to sort of edit it in Photoshop, so I don't need to actually go out and order 2x2 meter backdrops so they can fit the frame. So once you know your tools in Photoshop, they do come in handy, and if you do have an editor, then they should know as well. So for the sake of this, what I would do there, I can see like a red just above his head, some red fluff there. So I always like to look at composition first if I need to crop or move the baby, but he's fine there. Then the second thing I like to look at is any little fluffs or things that I need to remove. So with that, I use my patch tool, which pretty much looks like a patch. I'll zoom in just above his head there. You can see, I'll zoom in so you guys can see. There's like this red thing, which I don't know what it is. I'll go around that and then let go of my mouse. So I'm editing with my mouse. I do used to have a Wacom, I still got it, but because I don't edit it anymore, most of the time in my studio, I've just not been using it. So there's a little bit more there. So we'll just circle around it, hit delete, and then content aware, yes, 100%, and then we hit OK. And then I'll just zoom out and that's gone. Now usually because there's not the gaps up here and the gaps up here are not too big, I can still use this patch tool to cover those corners and make the flicati be extended. So I'm just going to zoom out. With bigger spaces, I like to zoom the image out, and I'll just go around the side there, and you'll see it'll start to create like a little outline. And once you do that, you can hit delete and it'll tell you content aware. Usually that's always the same for me. And I'll hit OK. And then that usually will find something similar for it to paste it there. So the Photoshop will look for anything similar, and then it'll sort of duplicate it and clone it. So as you can see, it's still left a gap up there. So I'm going to zoom in so you guys can see it. So I'm going to still go around. Now another way I can do it is use my clone tool. So my clone tool can work here as well. It pretty much what it means is it will clone wherever you're pressing to wherever you want to cover. So I'll show you that in a second. I might do that here. So this is the clone tool. It's like a stamp tool. If you keep pressing your mouse, you'll see the clone tool there. So what I would do now is I would hit Option or Alt and then say click here. So this bit will, wherever I'm clicking, it's going to stamp it and duplicate it where the space I want to cover. So as you can see, it's got in the corner there. So we want to stamp it elsewhere, and then you will see where it's copying from. So you can see the cross there. I'll just zoom in. You can see the cross, so it's copying from where the cross is. So if I copy up there, you'll see the cross is copying from where I've pressed first, where I've just pressed. So that means it's going to copy whatever content is there up in the top end where I'm going to cover. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so here again, I would use my patch tool. Now, sometimes you just got to play with it, but this is how I've been doing it for years. So there is no right, wrong way to edit. It's just how it works for you. So that's pretty much covered it all. As you can see, up here, it looks a bit odd and uneven, and around here as well. So I can either go with my patch tool and do that again, so you can grab some content, which looks okay. And then this is why you would use a, so I'm going to patch that as well, just so the feel of the flicati changes. And then what I would do here is go grab again my clone tool and just clone where I want to clone. So I'll hit Option and then click, and then I might just clone that, and then Option click, and I just clone here as well. So it looks like the flicati's hanging down. So that looks more realistic, and just clone there. Okay, so that looks perfect. So that's pretty much all I would do in regards to the look of the image. I like to get that out of the way, and then I like to go into and focus on the baby's skin, the redness and things like that. Okay, so that's what I do for the background. Now, in regards to baby skin, my personal preference is to keep, I know a lot of babies have flaky skin. I like to keep a little bit of texture so the baby doesn't look like a porcelain doll, but in saying that, a lot of photographers like to remove it. So this comes down to a personal preference. So in his case, this baby's case, he has a little bit of flaky skin on his hands, and what I would do is I'll just smooth out his skin and just leave the flaky skin just appear naturally underneath. So what I like to do first though, because he's quite a blonde baby, and usually any skin colored baby usually has red toes and fingers, so I like to use my red reducer. I'll grab it now. So I'll go to my actions, my own actions, and I use something called Newborn Skin Red Reducer, and it reduces the tone of the skin. So all I have to do is click on that and press play. Now there's a few steps to doing that, but instead of doing this on every single baby, I've recorded my steps and saved it as an action. So that's pretty much what an action is if you're not sure. And then what I need to do is I need to just minimize my brush so I can paint over his toes. And then what I like to do is I like to keep the baby looking as natural as possible. So I will just paint over his toes and usually the tip of the toes and the fingers, and around the eyes and the nose area. So just there, okay, and just in the corners, and maybe his heels as well, but in this case you can't see his heels, so that will create a layer for you. Now if I remove that, you'll see the difference. Can you see that? I'm coming closer. So that's before I remove the red, and this is after. So there's a huge difference, and with this you can change the opacity, so I can remove more of it or less. So usually it's about 60%, but depending on the baby you can move more or less. So I like it at about 66%. Okay, so before I go over and smooth out all the skin with my, no detail brush, then I like to first remove any purple, purple tones or red tones in the skin, anything like that first, and then do the smoothing out later on. So in this case, I think check his skin for anything I can remove with the patch tool, like up here. So I grab my patch tool, coming closer. You can just see there's a bit of skin there. I can remove that. You can also do this, just make sure you're on the background layer and then remove that. So let's just delete that. Okay. So make sure you're on the background layer to remove any skin, and just cover that with the patch tool, hit delete, and then okay, and that'll remove it. I'm pretty sure you can also do it with the spot healing brush tool. Now I don't use this much often, but if you just click on there, so you can adjust the sizing, the hardness of it as well, and anything like that, little blemishes, you can always remove. Now usually the dots on the nose I absolutely love, so I like to keep them. Look, it's just a personal preference. I like to keep the baby looking as natural as I can as possible, but anything like that. Another thing, if you wanted to remove the flaky skin just a little bit, you can use the spot healing brush tool. I usually use the patch tool. It just depends. So if I'm using the patch tool on something, I'll just start, using the patch tool to remove some of the flaky skin. So I'm not going to remove more because, like I said, I like to keep the baby looking as natural as possible, because I don't know, I just don't think it's like magazine work. I think it's really nice to keep the baby, looking like a newborn. Okay, so that's enough. See, as you can see from afar, you can't really see much flaky skin. Maybe just there next to the toes, that's a bit visible in a distance. Okay. All right, so now that we've done that, I want to go to clearing it, or just softening his skin. So I'm going to use my skin softener, no detail. Now it says no detail because it'll like sort of blur everything out, but I really lower the opacity, and I'll show you in a second. So I've selected no detail, and I'll hit play and just hit OK. And I like to keep it subtle, as the warning there says. And I'll just slightly go over. You can see there's cute blonde hairs on his arms. I love to keep that. I'm not going to remove it. Even on his face, he's got cute blonde hair. So I'm going to leave that. The dots on his nose, I'm just going to leave them. I really want to, you know, make those stand out. I don't want them to be removed fully. Just under the eyes a bit, because usually they're always red. And just slightly on his toes there. Just up there, his hand a bit. Okay. Alright, so that's at 100%. I'm going to zoom in and show you his face just a bit. Just close that a bit. Okay, so I'm going to reduce that maybe to about 70%. No, hang on. Yeah, 70%. Exactly 70%. And you can see if I turn off that layer for you to see the before and after, it's not a lot, but it's enough to make it look like a really nice clean image. So I like it like that, and because the baby has beautiful skin, you don't really need to do too much to it personally. If the baby had pimply skin, starting to get pimples, I would use definitely the patch tool, and I'd probably put the opacity of the no detail brush a bit more higher, so about like 80-85%. Now the next thing I would move on to is definitely to enhance the cheeks, because he's quite you know, he's got yellow, he's got white hair, so I want to enhance his baby cheeks. So I'll use my cheeks, my baby blush, and I'll press play, and it's just like a pink toned brush. I'll just make my brush a little bit bigger, that's fine. Let's do that. Okay, and I just want to go downwards. So I'm not going to hit, just click on there as a circle. I'm just going to hit downwards from his nose down. Okay, so that's too much at 50%. So I'm going to lower that down maybe at 30%. I think that's cute. And then we might just enhance his lips, and I'll make them a little bit pinky. So depending on your screen, it might look too much, but on my screen it looks totally fine. And I'm just going to press play on the pink, and I've just made his pink look really pink. Again, we have to lower the opacity. I've made it at 50%, but I'm going to, in his case, because every baby's different, remember that. So always work with your opacity. I'm going to make it at just 17%. Let me have a look. Yeah, 17%. Now, another thing I like to use is my lashes brush. Now, the lashes brush highlights the eyelids as well, or if the baby's eyes are open, it'll highlight their eyes as well. So I'm going to press play on that. And what you need to do is zoom a little bit closer and use your white brush, because we're on the black layer, and just see that it's just darkened it a bit. Okay, maybe that's too much. I need to make my brush a little bit smaller so I get right into that eye line. Okay, that's good. So I get right into that eye line there. Okay, so if I show you the before and after, so that's after, this is before, and this is after. So I like to look at it close, and I also like to zoom out and look at it and see how it looks. Sometimes you don't really need it, but it just highlights the eyes as well, and it just gives it a more sharper feel as well. Okay, so that's pretty much what I would do. Another thing, if you want, I like to use something called a pop brush. So it pretty much pops out the color in my images. Now, I tend to use a lot of bright, vibrant colors. So this one looks good sometimes if the colors are, you want to make them stand out. So I've gone and played that brush there. I'll go in, and what I would use it on here is pretty much maybe his hair. So it just stands out a bit. Can you see that? It made it a little bit too yellow, so I'm going to lower that. And maybe just on the flowers there, so they stand out. So I'll show you the before and after. Not much. I don't think we need it too much in this image, but it made it stand out just a bit. And I might go back to my red brush, this one, and just lower it a bit so it doesn't look too red. Okay, so that's the color pop brush. Another thing I like to do is, let's have a look. So in this image, what I like to do is I like to create a vignette for my images, and I just do that on myself with another layer. So I go ahead in my layers tab and just create a new layer, and then I'll go to my brush, and let me just move that. Okay, so I go to my brush, and then I'll select the same color of the backdrop. So in this case, it's baby blue. So I'll go and select that, maybe this blue, and hit OK. And then I like to make my brush a little bit bigger and my image smaller. So because of that, I'll brush around the image, and I actually might make it a bit darker. Okay, let's delete those steps, and I want maybe the blue just a little bit darker because I think I need to make it highlight. I need to highlight the image, create like a frame for it. So I'll go into the deeper blue colors of my image. So maybe not too deep. Maybe this one. And just around it. See that? It's a little bit deeper. Usually just on the corners of the image, because he's very close to the bottom. So I don't want to see, just with the edge of the circle brush. And I'll show you that before and after and what it looks like. So that's before, that's after. It just makes it feel a bit warmer as well. That's at 100 opacity, and I usually bring it down to about 90, 88, 85, 90. Let's leave it at 90. And so that's before, and that's after. It just gives it a nice finish touch to it. So I like to keep my images nice and bright like that, but I also like to make it feel very warm at the same time, if that makes sense. So that's what I do to finish off my image. I mean, if you want to get really fussy, select the background layer and you can liquefy his bottom there, because I always work with a baby with the nappy on. Sometimes it can make the wrap feel and look bulky. So if you really don't like that look, another thing I should have mentioned is you can actually liquefy it. And I'm pretty sure if you do edit, you probably know what the liquefy tool is. But make sure you select your background layer, which is your image, and then I would just liquefy just that bit. I don't want to liquefy too much. I really think he's okay like that personally, but it's a personal preference. I'll just slightly liquefy, maybe the in, yeah. And you can see the before and after and see how much you want to liquefy. So that was before and this is after. So I think that's fine. We'll hit OK. There you go. Okay. Let me have a look. So that's pretty much how I would edit my images. Again, my actions are based on around what I use. I also use a lot of Greater Than Gatsby, which is very similar to what I use. Exactly what they've got a lot of pink brushes, pop brushes, skin brushes. Anything you use is fine, but this is pretty much how I would edit this kind of image. Another thing, I think it can get complex with editing if you don't shoot the image as good as it being straight out of camera. That's when you get into a lot of editing. But if you can learn to shoot well enough, and take the image and not have to edit it a lot, I think it'll save you so much time. So that's one image I've edited. I'm going to go ahead and move to the next image where we have a backdrop. So I chose this particular one because of the composition, and then because of it's a different scenario. We have a backdrop with a line in it and things like that. So the same thing, I would start off with the background. I would grab, in this case, my patch tool, and I'll try and patch the timber flooring background. If you can't, it doesn't always work, then I would grab the clone tool and I will clone it. So I'm going to try and patch it so you guys can see if it works. If it doesn't, we'll go back and get the clone tool. Okay, so it works pretty fine. We just need to clone that line bit. So I'll grab my clone tool again, zoom in a bit more. Okay, and just hit Option, click, and then I will clone it like that. And then again, option click, and actually let's option click here so I can get it nice and straight, and voila, there you go. So that looks really nice. Okay, so what I would do here, I'm not going to change the composition of the baby, the positioning where the baby is. I'm going to actually leave him where he is because I like that. Look, angles are just personal preference. I like it like that because I can see his face and his hands, so he's in good position. Now, same thing I would do. I would probably go in and just liquefy his wrap a little bit. I'm not too fussed with liquefying because I know I usually do a good job, you know, during the actual session. But sometimes, you know, you might need it. It definitely does happen with me. So we're just going to, and usually with me it's always the end bit because I leave the nappy on. But you can see you can lift his arm up there. We don't want to play too much with his head. So I'm going to lift the bottom bit. There we go. Make it more round. Okay. So as before, after. So I made him a tiny bit smaller. There we go. Now, I don't like the cotton here, so I'm going to just add more cotton here. So again, I'll use my clone tool, just make my brush a bit smaller, and hit option, and I just clone that gap that was missing there. There we go. And a bit more here. Oh, yeah, just a bit more. There we go, because I think that's a bit... This, I might want to delete some of this, actually. Yeah. There we go. Okay. All right, so that's how it looks from far. All right, now, again, his fingers and his toes are quite red. And they're quite a lot, they're more red here than the other image. So, again, I'm going to use my red reducer and action. And then I'm going to just reduce his fingers and his toes, even maybe his face, because I like to brush him on myself with his cheeks. So that's at 60%. So that was before. This is after. So I pretty much think that's fine. And then we'll go in and smooth out his skin again with my soft, no detailed brush. And we'll hit play with that. Yeah, so if you do editing a lot, hopefully you do use actions, because I started to use actions probably from the second week of starting to editing. That was years ago. And I've actually forgotten how to go step by step. So once I've learned the step by step, I've recorded my steps and I've created actions of my own. Just makes life much easier. Okay, so I'm going to go in and put some blush on him. So I'm going to use this blush. Okay, and then we'll just make his lips a little bit pinky because I reduced them before because I used a red reducer on top. And I'm going to tone down his lips to about 33%. And I really want to highlight his eye line there. So I'll grab my, what was it called? Gosh, I forgot. The shape, the eyeshadow as well, so to highlight his eye line. So baby lashes, that's what it's called. I was looking for the name. Okay, so either lashes or obviously in this case lines. I'm only going to go from the in out just a bit in the further eye, because as it goes further out it gets a little bit unfocused, and that's pretty much it for that. And then I'm going to go in and smooth his skin now that I've done all his details. So I'm going to go in and use the no detail brush and just smooth out his skin, and then we'll change the opacity. So I'm going to just make my brush small as I can. I don't go through every single detail, like I said, because I like to keep, so you can see the hair there, it's just beautiful. Just go a bit smaller and then just around his mouth. Okay, so that's at 100%. I'll show you though, too close. And I'm going to make that at around 59%, I think. Okay. Now, I just spotted something there, which I didn't notice when I was fixing the background, is you can see my towel face washer that I used to pose him. So I'm going to grab my clone tool and just clone that a little bit. I'm going to make the brush a little bit more, but you want to make sure in this case, because now we have a lot of layers, make sure you're selecting the background layer. So I'm going to go in and just clone that bit. There we go. Just hit option and that creates the stamp, and I'll click it with my mouse, and then I can just go ahead with my mouse and just select everywhere there. Okay. Okay. That looks a little bit odd. Let's make this, I'm going to clone it a little bit more. Oh, you want to make sure when you're cloning, I didn't mention, is that you're cloning, like when you're cloning, you got to make sure that it's very close to the thing that you actually, the gap that you want to clone, because you don't, sometimes the light is different there and the color is different. So I'm going to do that again and just show you. So if I click there, option click, oh, I need to make sure the background layer is selected, and just slightly click there. It looks better than before. That bit actually looks like it's the bowl. Okay, so that's pretty much it. In this case, what I would like to do, and why sometimes I shoot these sort of angles where you can see the baby, but the bowl's not in the middle or whatever, because I like to use that vignette, if you want to call it, the frame of the image. So again, I would create a layer here, zoom in, and then I would get my brush tool and then select the, let's just move that, and select the color. So I would go in and select his wrap. Let's go a little bit darker, okay. And then zoom out of the image, make my brush a bit bigger. And what I want to do is, just a little bit bigger, I want to come over to that side and just come around. And then for this bit, I'll only do the corner and then the top corner up there. And that's pretty much it. So I've given it a nice blue so it matches the flower and his wrap as well. Now, I pretty much like it like that. I might actually change the color to make it a little bit maybe darker. Oh, that's too dark. Yeah. Maybe just like that. And then go over. And then do this and a bit there. And then I'm just going to lower the opacity as well so it's not too visible at about 80%. Okay. Another thing I might do is go back to my background layer and just with my clone tool, I want to clone those little sticky bits out of the flowers. So is it the, what are they called, stems or out of the flowers there that are sticking out? So I've just clicked option and then on the backdrop there I've clicked my mouse and then I'm just going to make my brush as small as I can and just cover that so you don't really see them. They don't look very nice. Just slightly cover. There we go. So they look like they're coming out. Alright, so that's pretty much how I would edit it. I'd go always back and just double check everything. Another thing is both images, or once I finish every image, I run a automated batch which sharpens every single image. I've got the action here as well, a subtle sharpen for print. So once I click play, it will just sharpen everything. And it'll flatten the image as well. So you want to make sure if you want to save it beforehand to do so, but it'll flatten the image and just make it that tad bit sharper if the client wants to print it as well. So hopefully you understood exactly how I edit. If you have any questions, please ask me in the Facebook group. I'd be happy to answer it for you. And yeah, so hopefully pretty straightforward editing. I try and perfect my image straight out of camera when I can. If I can't, then, you know, obviously there's always Photoshop to an extent, I say. So hopefully you enjoyed this editing video. If you have any questions, always here to help inside the Facebook group.